All across the world, scientists keep finding ancient cities, underground tunnels, stone monuments, and lost settlements that were built thousands of years ago without machines, without modern tools, and without written plans, yet somehow show engineering and planning that still cannot be fully explained. From frozen lands and deserts to hidden caves and forgotten towns, these places tell the story of civilizations that rose, mastered their world, and then vanished. Who were they? How did they build all this? And what secrets did they leave behind? In this video, we explore the most mysterious ancient sites ever discovered, and why they are forcing historians to rewrite human history. The Lost Pyramids of Peru. In the dry coastal plains of northern Peru, where desert winds move slowly across wide valleys and distant mountains fade into dusty horizons, there exists a vast complex of ancient structures that few people outside South America truly understand. A place called Tucumay, where more than 24 massive pyramids rise from the sand like frozen waves of earth and time. From above, the site looks unreal. 26 huge pyramid mounds spread across more than 200 hectares, arranged around a sacred mountain known as Cerro La Raya, forming one of the largest ceremonial and political centers ever built in the Americas. Unlike the stone pyramids of Egypt, the pyramids of Tucumay were constructed almost entirely from adobe, sun-dried mud bricks mixed with straw and clay, a material that seems fragile and temporary, yet has survived for nearly 1,000 years in one of the world's harshest environments. These pyramids were built by the Lambayeque culture around the 9th century, later expanded by the Chimu civilization, and eventually incorporated into the Inca Empire, making Tucumay a layered city where multiple civilizations built, destroyed, and rebuilt sacred spaces on top of one another across centuries. Each generation added new platforms, stairways, temples, and burial chambers, turning the site into a living record of political power, religious belief, and social organization. At its height, Tucumay was a pilgrimage center that attracted thousands of people from across the region, who came to participate in rituals, festivals, and ceremonies dedicated to gods associated with water, fertility, and mountains. Priests and rulers governed from these pyramids, using their elevated position to control both physical space and spiritual authority. Excavations have revealed that many of the pyramids contain hidden corridors, sealed chambers, and elaborate tombs filled with gold masks, silver ornaments, copper tools, ceramics, and textiles, indicating a society with advanced craftsmanship and far-reaching trade networks. Some burials belong to elite rulers and high priests, buried with hundreds of offerings meant to accompany them into the afterlife. What makes Tucumay especially mysterious is how suddenly it declined. Around the early 16th century, much of the complex was deliberately burned. Walls were blackened. Temples were destroyed. Sacred objects were broken or buried. People abandoned the site in a short period of time. It was not a slow decay. It was a collapse. Archaeologists are still debating why this happened. One leading theory involves extreme climate events linked to El Niño, which can bring devastating floods to Peru's normally dry coast, destroying crops, spreading disease, and undermining faith in religious leadership. Layers of mud and flood debris found at the site support this possibility. Another theory points to political conflict, as the Inca Empire expanded into the region and reorganized local power structures, weakening traditional priesthoods and disrupting long-established systems. Later, the arrival of Spanish conquistadors introduced warfare, forced conversion, and epidemics, accelerating the destruction of indigenous religious centers. Some evidence suggests that local leaders themselves may have ordered the burning of temples, symbolically ending old beliefs before submitting to new rulers. This idea is supported by the careful burial of sacred objects, as if people were trying to protect their spiritual heritage rather than abandon it carelessly. Tucumay's construction methods also raise important questions. Building pyramids of this size from mud brick required enormous organization. Millions of bricks had to be produced, transported, and stacked with precise alignment. Foundations had to be stabilized against earthquakes and flooding. Drainage systems had to be maintained. All of this was achieved without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or written engineering manuals. Labor was organized through communal systems, where entire communities contributed work in exchange for food, protection, and religious participation. These systems required strong leadership and social trust. The pyramids were not built for display alone. They were part of a carefully planned urban landscape, connected by roads, plazas, storage facilities, and residential zones. Agricultural canals diverted river water to support surrounding fields, feeding thousands of people. Tukume functioned as both a spiritual capital and an economic hub. Today, much of the site lies eroded and weathered, with pyramid faces collapsing slowly under wind and rain. Vegetation creeps over walls. Sand fills courtyards. Yet the scale of the complex remains overwhelming. Walking among these massive structures, it is hard to believe they were built entirely by hand from earth and straw. Modern archaeologists continue to uncover new chambers, offering, and construction phases, revealing that much of Tukume is still unexplored. Each excavation adds new details, but also new questions. Why did three major civilizations invest so heavily in this one place? What rituals were performed inside its deepest chambers? And why was it abandoned so completely? The lost pyramids of Peru remind us that great civilizations do not always leave behind stone monuments or written histories. Sometimes they leave only earth, memory, and silence. Yet within those silent walls lies the story of human ambition, belief, and resilience, waiting patiently to be understood. Throne of Solomon's hidden science. If you travel far into the mountains of northwestern Iran, far away from busy roads, crowded cities, and modern buildings, you eventually reach a quiet open plateau where the wind moves slowly across broken stone walls and silent courtyards, and where everything around you feels older than memory itself, as if time decided to slow down in this place and never fully move forward again. This place is called Takht Soliman, the Throne of Solomon. When you first arrive here, nothing immediately looks dramatic or mysterious. You see ruins, fallen walls, empty spaces, a wide open sky, and in the middle, a calm blue lake that reflects the clouds. But if you stay there long enough, if you walk slowly and let your eyes adjust, you begin to notice that nothing here was placed randomly, that every wall, every path, every building foundation was planned with intention by people who deeply understood the land they were living on. At the center of the site is a deep, circular lake created by hot water rising from far beneath the ground, water that flows continuously and never seems to change its level. No matter the season, no matter the weather, no matter how many centuries pass, a natural system so perfectly balanced that even modern scientists still study it with curiosity. To ancient people, this was not just water, it was a sign, a message from nature, something sacred. And instead of trying to control it, they built their entire world around it. Temples, palaces, ceremonial halls, and living quarters were placed in careful patterns around the lake, forming a layout that reflected their belief in balance between heaven, earth, fire, and water, a belief that shaped not only their religion but also their engineering. More than 1,500 years ago, during the Sasanian Empire, this place became one of the most important spiritual centers in Persia, home to the Adur-Gushnasp fire temple, where an eternal flame burned day and night as a symbol of royal power and divine approval, a fire that kings believed protected their rule and gave meaning to their authority. Before major wars, rulers came here to pray. After victories, they returned to give thanks. Without the blessing of this flame, many believed no empire could survive. But keeping an eternal fire alive in cold, windy mountains was not easy. It required intelligence, planning, experimentation. The builders designed thick stone walls to trap heat, narrow entrances to block strong winds, hidden air channels to feed oxygen without disturbing the flame, and special stone layouts to prevent moisture from entering the chamber, creating a system that worked quietly and naturally without any machines. Even today, engineers are surprised by how effective these designs still are. Around the sacred heart of the complex rises a massive oval wall made of enormous stone blocks, some weighing many tons, placed together so precisely that they have remained stable through earthquakes, storms, and centuries of erosion, a structure built without modern cement, without steel, without power tools, relying only on human skill, mathematics, and patience. Moving these stones across volcanic ground would have required thousands of workers, perfectly timed coordination, wooden sleds, rope systems, ramps, and deep knowledge of balance and friction. Yet no written records remain to explain exactly how it was done. Inside these walls once stood royal palaces, meeting halls, storage rooms, and residences for priests and officials, arranged in a way that allowed rainwater to drain safely, heat to circulate gently, and heavy buildings to remain stable, showing that this was not only a religious site, but also a fully functioning center of administration and governance. After the fall of the Sasanian Empire, the site slowly lost its political power, yet it never fully disappeared from memory, and centuries later, Mongol rulers restored parts of it, building new palaces on ancient foundations, respecting the original design because it still worked better than anything they could replace it with. As time passed, stories began to grow around the ruins. People connected it to King Solomon, a figure known in many traditions for wisdom and supernatural power. They said spirits were trapped beneath the lake, that treasures lay hidden in its depths, that disturbing the site would bring misfortune. Whether true or not, these legends reveal how deeply this place affected those who visited it. Modern archaeologists have uncovered layers of history showing that Takht-e Soliman was used, rebuilt, and adapted for centuries, yet many mysteries remain unsolved. How did they achieve such stability on unstable ground? How did they coordinate massive construction without written engineering systems? Why did certain technologies disappear? Where did that knowledge go? Today, visitors walk quietly through these ruins, hearing only the wind and their own footsteps, standing where kings once stood, where priests once prayed, where fires once burned for generations, and realizing that the past was far more intelligent, creative, and complex than we often assume. Takht-e Soliman is not just a collection of stones. It is proof that ancient people observed nature carefully, learned from it patiently, and worked with it respectfully, creating systems that lasted longer than their empires. And in its silent walls and still waters, it continues to remind us that much of human knowledge has been forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to listen. The footprint, older than humanity. In the quiet countryside of southwestern China, far from crowded cities and noisy highways, where mist drifts slowly over green hills and small villages live according to rhythms that have barely changed for generations. There exists a strange and unsettling mark pressed into solid stone, a single footprint that has silently challenged scientists, historians, and curious travelers for decades. Not because it is large or dramatic, but because it simply should not be there. Carved into a flat slab of ancient rock near Pingyan in Guizhou province, this footprint displays the unmistakable outline of a human-like foot, complete with clearly defined toes, a natural arch, and a rounded heel, shaped with such anatomical accuracy that it appears as if someone stepped into soft ground only moments ago and then vanished, leaving behind a trace that somehow survived for millions of years. According to geological studies, the stone that holds this impression formed hundreds of millions of years ago, long before mammals walked on land, long before dinosaurs ruled the planet, and unimaginably long before modern humans appeared, which makes the presence of a human-shaped footprint in this material deeply disturbing for anyone who accepts the standard timeline of evolution and Earth's history. Even more puzzling is the size of the mark itself, measuring nearly 60 centimeters in length, suggesting that the being who left it would have stood more than 3 meters tall, far larger than any known human or prehistoric hominin species, raising uncomfortable questions about whether unknown forms of intelligent life may once have existed on Earth, or whether something far stranger is at work. When scientists first encountered the site, many assumed that the footprint was nothing more than a natural illusion created by millions of years of erosion, water flow, chemical weathering, and random geological processes, phenomena that can sometimes produce shapes that resemble familiar objects and deceive the human brain into seeing meaning where none exists. Yet this explanation became harder to accept as researchers studied the impression more closely. The proportions of the toes, the curve of the arch, the pressure distribution in the heel, and the subtle depth variations across the footprint match. Real human walking patterns with surprising precision, as if weight shifted naturally from heel to toe during movement, something that normally requires muscles, joints, and biological motion rather than passive erosion. High-resolution imaging and surface analysis have revealed microfractures, mineral deposits, and sediment layers that indicate extreme age, while also showing that the imprint penetrates the rock in a way consistent with pressure, applied when the material was still soft, suggesting that whatever created it did so before the stone fully hardened, a fact that deepens rather than resolves the mystery. Some geologists argue that unusual sedimentary structures, combined with long-term weathering, can occasionally produce footprint-like depressions, while others propose that later geological events may have reshaped younger rock layers to appear much older than they actually are. Yet none of these explanations have been universally accepted, and each leaves important questions unanswered. Outside mainstream science, more radical theories have emerged, proposing lost advanced civilizations, unknown branches of human evolution, ancient giants mentioned in myths, or even extraterrestrial visitors in Earth's distant past. Ideas that remain unsupported by physical evidence but continue to attract attention precisely because conventional explanations feel incomplete. Similar giant footprints have been reported in various parts of the world, including South Africa, Turkey, Mexico, and the United States. Some later exposed as hoaxes, others still unresolved, forming a scattered global pattern of anomalies that resist easy classification and keep researchers cautious about drawing firm conclusions. Local folklore in the Pingyan region adds another layer to the story, with long-standing tales of powerful beings, mountain spirits, and ancient giants who once walked the land. Stories passed down through generations long before modern archaeology arrived, reflecting humanity's natural tendency to weave meaning around features that defy explanation. Modern technology has allowed scientists to analyze the footprint using laser scanning, chemical testing, and microscopic imaging. Yet even with these tools, no definitive verdict has emerged, leaving the site suspended between scientific skepticism and genuine curiosity. What makes the Pingyan footprint so compelling is not that it proves anything extraordinary, but that it exposes how fragile our understanding of deep history really is, reminding us that science is a process of constant revision rather than a finished book, and that many chapters of Earth's past may still be missing, buried, or erased by time. Throughout history, ideas once considered unchangeable have been overturned by new discoveries, from the movement of continents to the age of the universe, and the footprint stands as another reminder that certainty is often temporary. Standing beside the imprint today, visitors often experience a quiet sense of unease, not fear, but the realization that something does not quite fit, that the story we tell ourselves about where we come from may still be incomplete. Whether the Pingyan footprint is ultimately explained as a rare geological coincidence or remains an unresolved anomaly, it continues to invite questioning, debate, and imagination, serving as a silent reminder that the past is far more complex, mysterious, and unfinished than we often assume. And in that single impression pressed into ancient stone, humanity is confronted with one of its oldest and most uncomfortable questions. How much of our own story do we truly understand? The city under the ice. At the very bottom of the world, beyond oceans filled with icebergs, beyond storms that can tear ships apart, beyond temperatures that can freeze exposed skin in seconds, lies a continent so isolated and extreme that for most of human history it existed only in imagination, maps, and legends. A vast white landmass known as Antarctica, covered almost entirely by ice, hiding whatever lies beneath it from human eyes. For centuries, Antarctica was a mystery. Ancient maps hinted at its existence long before anyone officially reached it. Sailors spoke of frozen seas and unknown southern lands. Early explorers risked their lives just to glimpse its coastline. And even today, despite satellites, drones, and research stations, more than 90% of the continent remains buried under kilometers of solid ice, untouched and unseen. Because of this, Antarctica has become one of the last places on Earth where unanswered questions can still survive. And among those questions, one stands out more than any other. Is there something hidden beneath the ice? Something artificial? Something ancient? Something that should not be there? In recent years, satellite images and aerial scans have revealed strange geometric shapes beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, formations that appear triangular, symmetrical, and sharply defined. Structures that, to some observers, resemble pyramids rising from frozen mountains, triggering speculation that an unknown civilization may once have existed on this frozen continent long before it was buried in ice. Some of these formations look remarkably regular, with straight edges, sloping sides, and pointed peaks, features that in most parts of the world are associated with human construction rather than natural geology, leading many people to question whether these are simply mountains shaped by erosion or something far more unusual. Scientists explain that Antarctica's landscape includes nunataks, which are mountain peaks that rise above the ice sheet, formed through tectonic activity and sculpted by glaciers over millions of years, and that many of these peaks naturally take on pyramid-like forms due to erosion acting evenly on multiple sides, creating shapes that only appear artificial when viewed from certain angles. But for some researchers and independent investigators, this explanation feels incomplete. They point out that several of these formations appear in clusters. They seem aligned. They appear unusually symmetrical. And in satellite images, some even resemble stepped structures. To them, this suggests planning rather than randomness. The theory becomes even more intriguing when combined with geological evidence showing that Antarctica was once much warmer than it is today. Millions of years ago, parts of the continent were covered in forests, rivers, and grasslands. Fossilized trees have been found beneath the ice. Ancient pollen has been preserved in sediment. Evidence exists that Antarctica once supported complex ecosystems. More recently, around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, global temperatures shifted dramatically, sea levels rose, and massive climate changes reshaped the planet. Some alternative historians believe that during this transitional period, Antarctica may have been partially ice-free and capable of supporting human settlement. They argue that if advanced civilizations existed before this climate shift, their cities could now lie buried beneath kilometers of ice, completely hidden from view. Supporters of this idea often reference ancient maps, such as the Piri Reis map, which appears to show parts of Antarctica without ice, suggesting that someone may have charted its coastline before it froze over, implying the presence of advanced navigation and geographic knowledge long before conventional history allows. They also point to myths from various cultures that describe lost golden ages, great floods, and vanished lands, interpreting these stories as distant memories of civilizations destroyed by sudden climate change. From this perspective, Antarctica becomes not just a frozen desert, but a possible graveyard of forgotten human achievement. A place where cities, temples, and monuments might lie preserved under ice, waiting to be rediscovered. However, mainstream science remains skeptical. Geologists explain that Antarctica has been ice-covered for millions of years, far longer than humans have existed, and that while some coastal regions may have experienced temporary melting, the interior has likely remained frozen throughout human history. Radar scans used by research teams have mapped large areas beneath the ice, revealing mountains, valleys, rivers, and lakes, but no confirmed evidence of artificial structures. Yet even these scans are limited. Ice sheets can be more than 4 kilometers thick. Signal resolution decreases with depth. Small structures could easily remain undetected, and large anomalies are often difficult to interpret clearly. One of the most mysterious discoveries beneath Antarctica is Lake Vostok, a massive body of liquid water trapped under kilometers of ice, isolated from the surface for possibly millions of years, proving that complex hidden environments can exist beneath the frozen surface, completely invisible from above. If lakes can survive underground for so long, some ask, why not ruins? Why not cities? Why not evidence of something older than recorded history? Another layer of mystery comes from the extreme restrictions placed on Antarctica through international treaties. Military activity is banned. Resource extraction is limited. Access is controlled. Only certain research missions are allowed. For some, this raises suspicion. They wonder whether governments know more than they reveal, whether certain discoveries are being kept quiet, whether something has been found that does not fit accepted history. There is no solid proof of this. But in the absence of transparency, speculation grows. Stories spread online. Images circulate. Theories multiply. And Antarctica becomes a blank canvas onto which people project humanity's deepest questions about its past. Could there have been a global civilization before the last ice age? Did climate catastrophe erase entire chapters of history? Are we standing on the ruins of something far older than we realize? Or are we simply seeing patterns in nature and mistaking them for intention? This is the central tension of the Antarctica pyramids theory. It exists in the space between curiosity and imagination, between science and speculation, between evidence and possibility. On one side stands geology, climate science, and evolutionary history. On the other stands humanity's instinct to believe that its story is deeper, older, and more complex than textbooks suggest. What makes Antarctica so powerful in this debate is its silence. No cities, no roads, no witnesses, only ice. Ice that preserves, ice that hides, ice that remembers. Whatever lies beneath it, whether ordinary rock or extraordinary ruins, has been sealed away for thousands or millions of years, untouched by war, pollution, and modern construction. It is one of the few places on Earth where the past has not been completely rewritten by the present. For now, the idea of a city under the ice remains a theory, a possibility, a question, one that cannot yet be fully proven or fully dismissed. And perhaps that is why it continues to fascinate. Because in a world where almost everything has been mapped, scanned, and explained, Antarctica remains one of the last true unknowns. A frozen archive, a silent continent, a place where the boundary between history and mystery still exists, waiting, the hidden world beneath Viterbo. Beneath the quiet streets, stone houses, and medieval towers of the Italian town of Viterbo, where tourists walk casually through narrow alleys and local sit-in cafes without realizing what lies below their feet. There exists a vast underground world carved into volcanic rock, a hidden network of tunnels, chambers, stairways, and passages that stretches for kilometers beneath the surface, silently preserving the traces of civilizations that lived, worked, and survived there thousands of years ago. At street level, Viterbo appears like many other historic towns in central Italy, with its churches, fountains, and ancient walls. Yet the true story of this place begins underground, in darkness, in spaces shaped by human hands long before modern engineering, where entire systems of movement, storage, ritual, and defense were built into the soft tufa stone formed by volcanic activity millions of years earlier. This underground complex, often referred to as the hypogeum of Viterbo, did not emerge from a single plan or a single civilization, but grew gradually over centuries, beginning with the Etruscans, one of Italy's earliest advanced cultures, who learned to excavate the soft volcanic rock with simple tools, creating tombs, wells, drainage systems, and ritual chambers that later generations would expand and transform. For the Etruscans, underground spaces were not merely practical, but deeply spiritual, associated with the afterlife, ancestors, and sacred forces believed to exist beneath the earth. And many of the earliest tunnels in Viterbo were likely connected to burial practices and religious ceremonies designed to maintain balance between the living and the dead. As Roman power expanded across Italy, these subterranean structures were adapted for new purposes, becoming storage rooms for grain and wine, aqueduct channels for water distribution, escape routes in times of siege, and cooling chambers that preserved food in an age without refrigeration, showing how practical engineering gradually merged with older spiritual traditions. During the Middle Ages, when Viterbo became an important political and religious center and even served as a papal residence, the underground network grew even further, with monasteries, noble families, and city authorities carving new tunnels beneath palaces, churches, and fortifications, creating hidden connections that allowed people to move unseen, store valuables securely, and survive prolonged conflicts. What makes this underground world so remarkable is not only its size, but its complexity, with multiple levels stacked beneath one another, intersecting corridors leading to unexpected chambers, spiral staircases descending into darkness, and ventilation shafts that regulate air circulation, allowing these spaces to remain usable even after centuries of abandonment. Some passages are so narrow that only one person can pass at a time, while others open into wide halls supported by carved stone pillars, demonstrating that the builders understood load distribution, structural stability, and airflow despite lacking modern calculation tools. Archaeologists exploring these tunnels have discovered evidence of workshops, kitchens, water systems, religious altars, and even small living quarters, suggesting that at certain periods, people may have spent extended time underground, either for protection during invasions or as part of religious retreat practices. One of the most mysterious aspects of the Viterbo hypogum is the presence of sealed chambers and blocked corridors whose original purpose remains unknown, some filled deliberately with rubble, others closed with stone slabs, raising questions about whether they were abandoned due to collapse risk, hidden intentionally to protect something, or sealed after outbreaks of disease or political upheaval. Local legends speak of secret libraries, buried treasures, and forbidden rooms hidden deep within the tunnels, stories passed down through generations that reflect both fascination and fear of the unseen world below. And although no dramatic treasure has been found, the persistence of these stories shows how strongly the underground shaped the town's identity. Modern mapping projects using laser scanning and 3D imaging have begun to reveal the true scale of the network, showing that many tunnels extend beneath areas never suspected to contain underground structures, forming a labyrinth that mirrors the city above in complexity. Engineers studying the site are often surprised by the durability of these spaces, noting that drainage channels prevent water accumulation, ventilation shafts reduce humidity, and stone reinforcements stabilize weak zones, allowing many chambers to remain structurally sound after thousands of years. This level of long-term planning suggests that the builders expected their underground systems to serve multiple generations, not merely short-term needs. During wars, plagues, and political turmoil, these tunnels likely saved countless lives, providing shelter, escape routes, and hidden supply storage when the city above was under threat. They functioned as a second city beneath the first, a shadow version of Viterbo, invisible, silent, but essential. Today, much of this underground world remains closed to the public, accessible only to researchers and guided expeditions, meaning that large portions are still unexplored, undocumented, and poorly understood. New chambers are still being discovered. New connections are still being mapped. And each discovery adds new questions about how deeply ancient societies integrated underground architecture into daily life. The Hypogum of Viterbo reminds us that history is not only written on the surface, in monuments and streets, but also hidden below, in darkness, in forgotten corridors where people once walked, worked, prayed, and waited. It shows that civilizations did not merely expand outward, but downward, carving safe spaces into the earth itself, shaping landscapes that most modern visitors never see. And beneath the modern town, beneath the noise and movement of everyday life, this underground world continues to exist, quietly preserving the memory of generations who learned that survival sometimes meant disappearing beneath the surface. The necropolis of Ancalu Ruju. In the quiet countryside near the town of Alghero in northern Sardinia, where olive trees sway gently in the Mediterranean wind and limestone hills rise slowly from red soil, there lies a place that most travelers pass without realizing its true importance. A hidden city of the dead carved directly into stone, known as the necropolis of Angelou Ruju, one of the largest and most mysterious prehistoric burial complexes in Europe. At first glance, the site appears simple: low rocky outcrops, small openings in the ground, shallow depressions in limestone. But beneath these modest features lies an underground world created more than 5,000 years ago by people who possessed a deep understanding of ritual, symbolism, and the meaning of death. A place where hundreds of chambers were carved by hand using stone and bone tools, long before metal technology reached the island. Ankeluruju contains more than 35 hypogeic tombs, known as domas, Dijanas, or houses of the fairies, a name given by later generations who could not imagine how ancient people without advanced tools could carve such precise spaces into solid rock. These tombs were not random holes in the ground. They were carefully designed structures, often consisting of entrance corridors, main chambers, side rooms, and symbolic carvings, arranged to resemble the homes of the living, suggesting that death was viewed not as an end, but as a continuation of existence in another realm. The builders belonged to the Ozieri culture, which flourished in Sardinia during the late Neolithic period, around 3200 to 2800 BCE, a society that developed advanced pottery, trade networks, and spiritual traditions long before many other parts of Europe reached similar levels of organization. For these people, burial was not a private act. It was a communal and sacred event. The dead were placed in collective tombs, often alongside relatives and ancestors, creating underground family networks that mirrored social bonds on the surface. Excavations have revealed that bodies were often arranged in fetal positions, sometimes painted with red ochre, a mineral pigment associated with blood, rebirth, and life force in many ancient cultures, indicating a belief in regeneration and spiritual renewal after death. The interior walls of many tombs are decorated with carvings and reliefs, including false doors, spirals, horns, and geometric patterns, symbols believed to represent transitions between worlds, protection from evil forces, and connections to fertility and cosmic cycles. One of the most striking motifs found at Ankeluruju is the bull horn symbol, carved above entrances and on chamber walls, associated with strength, fertility, and divine power, suggesting that animal symbolism played a central role in religious life. Some chambers were later reused and modified during the Copper Age and Bronze Age, showing that the site remained spiritually important for thousands of years, passed from generation to generation as a sacred landscape rather than abandoned and forgotten. This long-term continuity reflects deep respect for ancestors and a strong sense of cultural identity. What makes Ankeluruju especially remarkable is the level of technical skill involved in its construction. Carving dozens of underground chambers into hard limestone using primitive tools required extraordinary patience, planning, and collective effort. Builders had to calculate wall thickness, ceiling stability, and ventilation, ensuring that the chambers would not collapse over time. They also had to manage debris removal, lighting, and structural symmetry, all without written plans or formal engineering education. Archaeologists believe that construction may have taken decades, involving entire communities working together as part of religious duty. Beyond human remains, the tombs have yielded pottery, stone tools, beads, shells, and figurines, evidence of trade links with mainland Italy, Corsica, and other Mediterranean regions, indicating that Sardinia was not isolated but integrated into early networks of cultural exchange. These offerings were not random. They were carefully selected items believed to accompany the dead into the afterlife, providing protection, status, and comfort beyond death. Some chambers show signs of repeated rituals, including fires, feasting remains, and ceremonial deposits, suggesting that families returned regularly to honor ancestors, seek guidance, or reinforce social bonds. In this sense, Ankeluruju was not merely a cemetery. It was a living spiritual center, a place where memory, identity, and belief were continuously renewed. Local legends later transformed these underground tombs into fairy houses, spirit dwellings, and cursed places, reflecting how later generations tried to interpret structures whose original meaning had been lost. Some stories warned that disturbing the tombs would bring illness or misfortune, which ironically helped preserve the site for centuries. Modern archaeological studies have used carbon dating, DNA analysis, and isotopic testing to reconstruct the lives of those buried here, revealing details about diet, migration, health, and social structure, showing that these early Sardinians were skilled farmers, herders, and artisans who adapted successfully to island life. Yet despite scientific progress, many questions remain unanswered. Why were certain tombs larger and more elaborate than others? How were leaders chosen? What specific rituals were performed inside sealed chambers? And how did spiritual beliefs evolve over thousands of years? Walking through Angelu Ruju today, visitors move quietly through narrow passages and low-ceilinged rooms, sensing the presence of countless lives that once shaped this land. The air is cool, sound is muted, light is dim. It feels like stepping outside time. The necropolis of Angelu Ruju stands as a reminder that humanity's relationship with death has always been complex, thoughtful, and deeply meaningful. Long before written religion, formal philosophy, or monumental temples, people were already asking the same questions we ask today. Where do we go after death? How do we honor those who came before us? And how do we leave traces that will outlast our own lives? In these silent stone chambers, carved with patience and belief, those questions still remain. The tumulus of Bougon. In the quiet countryside of western France, where rolling fields stretch beneath wide open skies and small villages seem untouched by modern urgency, there exists a group of ancient stone mounds that appear at first glance to be nothing more than gentle rises in the landscape. Yet beneath these grassy hills lies one of the oldest and most sophisticated funerary complexes in Europe, known today as the tumulus of Bougon. For thousands of years, these monuments remained almost invisible, slowly blending into the natural terrain, their true nature hidden beneath soil, vegetation, and time. Until modern archaeology revealed that these modest-looking mounds were, in fact, massive stone-built tombs constructed more than 5,000 years ago by Neolithic communities who possessed an unexpected level of organizational skill and architectural knowledge. The Bougon complex consists of 5 main tumuli, labeled A through E, each built during different periods between approximately 4700 and 3500 BCE, making them older than Stonehenge and nearly as ancient as the earliest Egyptian pyramids, a fact that challenges the common assumption that advanced monumental construction began only in a few isolated parts of the ancient world. Each tumulus contains carefully constructed stone chambers made from large limestone slabs, some weighing several tons, transported from distant quarries using nothing more than human strength, wooden tools, ropes, and collective coordination, an achievement that required detailed planning, leadership, and social cooperation on a scale rarely associated with prehistoric farming societies. Inside these mounds, narrow corridors lead into burial chambers where human remains, pottery, stone tools, beads, and animal bones have been discovered, indicating that these structures were used for collective burial and ritual activity over many generations, rather than for single individuals, reflecting a worldview centered on ancestry, continuity, and shared identity. What makes Bougon especially remarkable is the precision with which its chambers were built, with flat stone walls aligned carefully, ceilings supported by massive slabs, and entrances positioned according to deliberate orientations, suggesting that the builders possessed both practical engineering knowledge and symbolic understanding of space and direction. Some chambers were deliberately sealed, reopened, modified, and resealed over centuries, showing that later generations did not simply abandon these monuments, but actively maintained and reinterpreted them as part of living tradition. Excavations have revealed that thousands of human bones were placed inside certain chambers, often rearranged over time, indicating complex funerary rituals that may have involved secondary burials, ancestor veneration, and seasonal ceremonies. The process of building these tumuli would have taken years, if not decades, involving quarrying stone, transporting heavy blocks across uneven terrain, shaping them with stone tools, constructing stable foundations, and then covering the entire structure with tons of earth and gravel, all while maintaining agricultural life and social stability. This level of long-term commitment suggests that the monuments served not only religious purposes but also social ones, reinforcing cooperation, hierarchy, and shared belief among scattered communities. Researchers believe that construction likely involved ritualized labor, where work itself became part of spiritual practice, transforming physical effort into a form of devotion. The landscape around Bougon also appears to have been deliberately chosen, with the tumuli placed on elevated ground overlooking valleys and water sources, making them visible landmarks that connected the living world to ancestral territory. These mounds functioned as territorial markers, memory anchors, and sacred reference points, embedding social identity directly into the land. Over time, as new cultural traditions emerged in Europe, the original meaning of Bougon slowly faded, yet the site continued to influence local folklore, inspiring stories of giants, buried kings, and supernatural guardians. Some villagers believed the mounds contained hidden treasure, while others avoided them out of fear, unintentionally protecting them from destruction. Modern archaeological research has employed radiocarbon dating, DNA analysis, and 3D reconstruction to study Bougon's builders, revealing that they were early farmers and herders who combined agricultural life with complex spiritual systems, challenging outdated stereotypes of prehistoric Europeans as simple or primitive. Despite decades of study, many questions remain unresolved. How leadership was organized, how labor was coordinated across communities, how construction knowledge was transmitted without writing, and what precise beliefs motivated such immense investment in burial monuments. Walking among the tumuli today, visitors experience a quiet sense of continuity, standing on ground shaped by human intention more than 5,000 years ago, surrounded by structures that outlived countless generations, wars, and social transformations. The tumulus of Bougon reminds us that long before cities, kingdoms, and written history, human societies were already capable of long-term planning, symbolic thinking, and collective achievement on an impressive scale. These ancient mounds are not relics of ignorance. They are monuments to cooperation, memory, and belief. They represent humanity's early attempt to understand life, death, and permanence in a changing world. And in their silent presence, they continue to speak across millennia to anyone willing to listen. Cahuachi, the desert ceremonial city. In the heart of southern Peru, where endless desert plains stretch beneath a burning sun and powerful winds reshape the sand every day, far from rivers, forests, and fertile farmland, there rises a cluster of massive earthen pyramids and platforms that seem almost impossible to exist in such a harsh environment. A ceremonial city known as Cahuachi, built by the Nazca civilization more than 2,000 years ago in a place where survival itself was a daily challenge. From a distance, Cahuachi appears like a series of low hills scattered across the desert, their surfaces softened by erosion and covered in dust. Yet beneath this quiet appearance lies one of the largest and most important religious centers in pre-Columbian South America, a site that once drew pilgrims, priests, and travelers from hundreds of kilometers away. Unlike cities such as Rome, Athens, or Teotihuacan, Cahuachi was not designed as a permanent residential settlement. It had no dense neighborhoods, no crowded markets, no defensive walls. Instead, it functioned primarily as a sacred gathering place, a spiritual capital where people came for rituals, ceremonies, and seasonal festivals before returning to their home villages. At its peak, Cahuachi contained more than 40 major pyramidal structures, built almost entirely from adobe bricks made of sun-dried clay mixed with straw, stacked layer upon layer to form massive stepped platforms that rose above the flat desert landscape. Each pyramid required millions of bricks, produced by hand, transported across open sand, and carefully assembled by organized labor groups, a process that demanded extraordinary coordination and social discipline. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is that the Nazca built Cahuachi in one of the driest regions on Earth, where rainfall is extremely rare and rivers flow only seasonally, forcing them to develop sophisticated underground water systems called puquios, spiral-shaped aqueducts that captured groundwater and distributed it to surrounding settlements. Without this hidden hydraulic network, Cahuachi could never have existed. Water was not only necessary for daily life, it was central to religious belief. To the Nazca, water represented life, fertility, and divine favor in a desert world constantly threatened by drought. For this reason, many ceremonies held at Cahuachi were closely connected to rain-making rituals, offerings to mountain spirits, and appeals to cosmic forces believed to control weather and agriculture. Archaeological excavations have uncovered thousands of ceremonial objects buried within and around the pyramids, including finely painted pottery, textiles, wooden staffs, shell ornaments, musical instruments, and human remains, all carefully placed as offerings rather than discarded waste. Some burials contain high-status individuals wrapped in elaborate fabrics, suggesting the presence of religious elites, who served as intermediaries between the people and the spiritual realm. Other discoveries reveal more disturbing practices. Several skeletons show signs of ritual sacrifice, including decapitation and deliberate bone modification, reflecting beliefs that blood and life energy were necessary to maintain cosmic balance. The famous Nazca lines, enormous geoglyphs etched into the nearby desert floor, are closely connected to Cahuachi. Many of these lines lead directly toward the ceremonial center, suggesting that pilgrims may have walked along these massive pathways as part of ritual processions, transforming the entire landscape into a sacred stage. From the air, the Nazca lines form animals, spirals, and geometric shapes. On the ground, they function as roads of devotion, pathways of belief, symbols written into the earth itself. Cahuachi reached its peak between 200 BCE and 500 CE, during a period of relative stability and prosperity, yet it was gradually abandoned after a series of environmental disasters, including powerful floods linked to El Niño events, which damaged structures, destroyed crops, and undermined religious authority. When the priests could no longer guarantee rain and protection, faith began to weaken. People stopped coming. Ceremonies faded. The city slowly fell silent. Rather than being violently destroyed, Cahuachi was carefully closed. Many buildings were intentionally buried with layers of sand and debris, sealing offerings inside, as if the Nazca were respectfully ending a sacred chapter rather than abandoning it in panic. This deliberate closure suggests deep spiritual meaning, a ritual farewell to a holy place. Modern researchers using ground-penetrating radar and remote sensing continue to uncover hidden platforms and chambers beneath the sand, revealing that much of Cahuachi remains unexplored. Each new discovery reshapes our understanding of how the Nazca organized religion, labor, and power. Despite decades of study, many mysteries remain. How were millions of bricks produced so efficiently? How were massive ceremonies coordinated without writing? How did priests maintain authority across wide territories? And what precise meanings lay behind the rituals performed on these platforms? Standing among the eroded pyramids today, visitors experience an overwhelming sense of emptiness. No walls, no roofs, no voices, only wind and sound. Yet beneath this silence lies the memory of music, chanting, colorful garments, smoke from offerings, and thousands of people gathered in shared belief. Cahuachi reminds us that great civilizations are not defined only by stone cities and armies, but by invisible systems of faith, cooperation, and imagination. In one of the harshest environments on Earth, the Nazca created a spiritual capital that lasted for centuries, proving that human creativity can flourish even where nature seems most unforgiving. And in the shifting sands of southern Peru, the story of Cahuachi continues, waiting for future generations to uncover what still lies hidden beneath the desert floor. The mystery of the Malta cart ruts. On the small Mediterranean island of Malta, where ancient temples stand beside modern roads and blue seawater surrounds limestone cliffs shaped by thousands of years of wind and waves, there exists a strange network of parallel grooves carved deep into solid rock, stretching across hills, valleys, farmland, and even disappearing beneath the sea, a phenomenon known as the Malta cart ruts, and one of the most puzzling archaeological mysteries in Europe. At first glance, these grooves look simple, two narrow channels running side by side, sometimes splitting. But when seen from above, they form a massive interconnected system covering large portions of the island, suggesting deliberate planning rather than random marks left by chance. Each pair of ruts is usually spaced about 1.5 meters apart, almost identical to the width of a modern vehicle, and in some places they are carved more than half a meter deep into hard limestone, something that could not have happened quickly or accidentally. Some of these ruts climb steep hills, others descend into valleys. Many suddenly end at cliffs, and some continue directly into the sea, disappearing beneath the waves as if whatever created them once extended beyond today's coastline. No one knows exactly when the cart ruts were made. Some researchers place them in the Bronze Age. Others believe they are older, possibly dating back to Malta's prehistoric temple period more than 5,000 years ago. A few suggest they may be even older, formed when sea levels were much lower during the last ice age. Each theory raises new questions. If they were created by carts, what kind of vehicles could carve deep grooves into solid rock? If they were created by sleds, what materials were transported? If they were part of irrigation systems, why do they follow such irregular paths? And if they were ritual pathways, why are they so widespread and practical in appearance? One of the most popular explanations is that these ruts were created by wooden carts with heavy stone wheels repeatedly passing over soft limestone when it was still relatively pliable, gradually carving deeper and deeper tracks over centuries of use. According to this theory, Malta once had an extensive transportation network used for moving stones, agricultural goods, and building materials. But critics point out serious problems. Limestone hardens quickly when exposed. Many ruts appear too deep and sharp to be formed by wooden wheels. Some occur on slopes too steep for wheeled vehicles. And in many places, multiple ruts intersect in chaotic patterns that would have caused constant collisions if used as roads. Another theory suggests that sledges dragged heavy loads over wet limestone using wooden runners, which slowly cut grooves into the surface. This would explain the depth and shape of some ruts. Yet this still does not explain why so many routes overlap, split, and rejoin without clear logic. Some researchers propose that the ruts were part of ancient water management systems, used to guide rainwater into reservoirs and farmland. However, many ruts do not lead toward water sources. Some climb uphill, others end abruptly, which makes them inefficient as irrigation channels. More speculative ideas suggest that the cart ruts formed part of ritual landscapes, marking sacred routes between temples, burial sites, and ceremonial centers, transforming movement itself into a spiritual act. Malta's prehistoric culture placed enormous importance on sacred geometry and landscape alignment, as seen in its megalithic temples, some of the oldest stone buildings in the world. From this perspective, the ruts may represent symbolic pathways rather than practical roads. The mystery deepens when underwater surveys revealed submerged ruts and stone structures off Malta's coast, indicating that parts of the system were created when sea levels were much lower, possibly more than 10,000 years ago. If true, this would place their origin far earlier than most accepted timelines of advanced human activity in the region. Divers have reported seeing ruts continuing across the seabed, along with cut stones and rectangular formations, suggesting that large areas of land now underwater were once inhabited. Yet these findings remain controversial due to limited documentation and difficult research conditions. Modern technology has allowed researchers to map the ruts in high detail using drones, laser scanning, and satellite imagery, revealing patterns that suggest deliberate planning, with major routes branching into secondary paths and converging near ancient settlements and temple sites. This supports the idea of an organized system rather than random marks. Still, no tools, carts, or written records have ever been found to explain how the ruts were made. No clear workshop sites, no preserved wheel remains. No engineering diagrams, only grooves in stone. Silent evidence without instructions. Local legends offer their own explanations. Some stories claim giants carved the ruts while dragging massive stones. Others speak of lost civilizations that possessed forgotten technologies. Some villagers once believed the grooves were created by spirits moving through the land. While these stories are not scientific, they reflect how deeply the mystery has shaped local imagination. What makes the Malta cart ruts so fascinating is not that they prove something extraordinary, but that they resist simple explanation. They sit at the intersection of archaeology, geology, and speculation. They remind us that ancient societies interacted with their environments in complex ways that do not always fit modern categories. They also show how easily evidence can survive while meaning disappears. The people who created these ruts understood exactly why they made them. They knew where they led. They knew how they were used. But that knowledge is gone, erased by time. Today, visitors walk beside these grooves, tracing them with their fingers, following paths that once carried movement, labor, and purpose, yet now lead only to unanswered questions. The Malta cart ruts are like sentences written in a language no one can read anymore. Clear, permanent, and mysterious. And until new evidence emerges, they remain one of Europe's most enduring archaeological puzzles, carved into stone, waiting patiently for someone, someday, to understand their story. Ahu Vinapu and the Lost Knowledge of Easter Island. On one of the most isolated islands on Earth, surrounded by thousands of kilometers of open Pacific Ocean in every direction, where waves crash endlessly against volcanic cliffs and strong winds sweep across empty grasslands, there stands a strange stone platform that seems completely out of place in its environment, a structure so precisely built that it has puzzled researchers for generations, known as Ahu Vinapu, one of the greatest architectural mysteries of Easter Island. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as it is known to its native people, is famous for its massive stone statues, the moai, figures with long faces and solemn expressions that stare silently across the island as if guarding memories of a forgotten world. Yet while most visitors focus on these towering statues, few realize that beneath some of them lie platforms constructed with a level of stone-cutting skill that rivals the finest masonry of ancient Peru. Ahu Vinapu is one such platform. Unlike most other Ahu structures on the island, which were built using relatively rough stone blocks stacked together with small stones filling the gaps, Vinapu's lower walls are made of large, carefully shaped blocks fitted so tightly that no blade can slide between them, forming smooth, seamless surfaces that resemble the famous polygonal walls of Cusco and Sacsayhuaman in South America. Each stone was individually cut, polished, and adjusted to match its neighbors with extraordinary precision, a process that requires advanced planning, skilled craftsmanship, and deep understanding of geometry and load distribution. Yet no metal tools, wheels, or written engineering manuals existed on Easter Island at the time. Some blocks weigh several tons. Many have multiple angled edges. Some fit together like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle. And all of them remain locked in place after centuries of earthquakes, storms, and erosion. This raises a fundamental question. How did a small, isolated island community achieve construction techniques comparable to those of major continental civilizations? One theory suggests that the builders of Vinapu inherited ancient masonry knowledge, passed down orally through generations, techniques developed through long experimentation and mastery of stonework, using basalt tools and abrasive sand. According to this view, Rapa Nui craftsmen gradually perfected their skills until they could achieve remarkable precision without metal. Another theory points to possible contact between Polynesians and South American cultures long before Europeans arrived in the Pacific. Genetic studies, linguistic similarities, and shared agricultural crops like the sweet potato suggest that limited contact may have occurred across the ocean. If knowledge traveled along with people and plants, then advanced stoneworking techniques could have crossed the Pacific as well. Some researchers go even further, proposing that Vinapu represents the last surviving trace of a much older maritime civilization that once connected distant parts of the world through ocean routes, a culture whose ships, maps, and technologies have been lost to time. While this idea remains speculative, it continues to attract attention because conventional explanations feel incomplete. Adding to the mystery is the fact that Vinapu was built in multiple stages, with later generations adding less refined stonework on top of earlier precision masonry, suggesting that advanced techniques were gradually forgotten rather than improved. This pattern appears in many ancient sites around the world, where early phases show higher craftsmanship than later ones. raising uncomfortable questions about cultural decline and loss of knowledge. Ahu Vinapu also had ceremonial significance. It served as a foundation for Moai statues and as a sacred space where rituals honoring ancestors and gods were performed. The platform faces the ocean, aligning with solar and lunar cycles, reinforcing its role in spiritual life and navigation traditions. To the people of Rapa Nui, stone was not merely a building material. It was alive with spiritual energy. It connected humans to ancestors, land, and sky. Transporting and shaping these massive stones would have required hundreds of workers, coordinated through chants, rituals, and social organization, turning construction into both labor and ceremony. Every block placed was an act of devotion. Over time, Easter Island faced severe ecological stress, deforestation, soil erosion, resource depletion, and internal conflict weakened society. Moai construction slowed. Trade networks collapsed. Skills were lost. By the time Europeans arrived in the 18th century, much of the island's ancient knowledge had already vanished. What remains today are silent stones and unanswered questions. Modern laser scanning and structural analysis have confirmed the extraordinary precision of Vinapu's masonry, yet no definitive explanation has been accepted. No quarry marks reveal the full process. No tools show how angles were measured. No texts describe the methods. Only results remain. Ahu Vinapu stands as evidence that isolation does not necessarily limit human ingenuity. That small communities can achieve great technical feats. That knowledge can emerge, flourish, and disappear without leaving instructions behind. Walking along its smooth stone wall today, feeling the perfectly aligned surfaces beneath your fingers, it is difficult not to sense that something important has been lost. Not just techniques, but ways of thinking, ways of organizing knowledge, ways of passing wisdom across generations. Vinapu is not just a platform, it is a message from the past. A reminder that history is not always a straight line of progress. Sometimes it rises, sometimes it falls, and sometimes it leaves behind stones that whisper of abilities we no longer fully understand. WF16 and the birth of organized civilization. In the dry highlands of southern Jordan, where rocky hills fade into desert plains and ancient trade routes once connected Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean world, there lies a quiet archaeological site that at first appears unremarkable, a scattering of stones, shallow depressions, and low walls barely rising from the ground. Yet hidden within these simple remains is one of the most important stories ever discovered about how human civilization truly began, a story preserved at a place known as WF16. Unlike famous ancient cities with towering temples and massive monuments, WF16 offers no dramatic skyline, no giant statues, no visible grandeur, and yet it represents something far more fundamental. Because here, more than 10,000 years ago, human beings began to experiment seriously with permanent settlement, organized community life, and shared social systems that would eventually give rise to agriculture, cities, and modern society. WF16 dates back to the pre-pottery Neolithic, a period around 9,500 to 8,500 BCE, a time when humans were still largely transitioning from nomadic hunter-gatherers into settled villagers, learning through trial and error how to live in one place, cultivate plants, manage animals, and cooperate on a scale never before attempted. At WF16, archaeologists have uncovered circular and oval buildings made from stone foundations and mud brick walls, arranged in clusters around open courtyards, forming one of the earliest known examples of planned community layout, where homes, workspaces, and public areas were deliberately organized rather than randomly scattered. These buildings were not temporary shelters. They were solid structures designed to last for generations. Their floors were carefully plastered. Their walls were reinforced. Their entrances were positioned strategically. Their interiors show signs of repeated repair and maintenance, proving that people invested, emotionally and practically, in this place. Perhaps the most remarkable discovery at WF16 is a large communal building, much bigger than any individual house, capable of holding dozens of people at once. interpreted by researchers as an early form of meeting hall, ritual center, or council space, where community decisions, ceremonies, and shared activities likely took place. This structure suggests that social organization had already reached a level where collective planning, leadership, and cooperation were necessary, challenging the idea that early farmers lived in small, loosely connected groups. Evidence from WF16 shows that its inhabitants cultivated wild cereals, processed plant foods, hunted animals, and collected resources from surrounding landscapes, combining multiple survival strategies while slowly transitioning toward full agriculture. Grinding stones, sickle blades, storage pits, and food processing tools indicate systematic food production and long-term planning, qualities essential for the emergence of stable societies. Archaeologists have also found elaborate stone bowls, decorated objects, and carefully shaped tools, revealing that these people were not concerned only with survival, but also with aesthetics, identity, and social status. Personal ornaments made from shells and beads suggest long-distance trade networks, connecting WF16 to coastal regions hundreds of kilometers away. Perhaps most intriguing is the evidence of early ritual behavior. Some structures contain unusual deposits of animal bones, special objects, and deliberate architectural modifications that appear symbolic rather than practical, hinting at early religious practices, ancestor worship, and shared belief systems that helped bind the community together. Burials near or beneath houses indicate that the dead remained closely connected to the living, reinforcing family ties and territorial claims. Life at WF16 was not easy. The climate was unstable. Resources fluctuated. Droughts and cold periods threatened crops. Disease could spread easily in close settlements. Yet people continued to return, rebuild, and adapt, showing resilience and commitment to communal life. This persistence reflects a major psychological shift in human history: the willingness to invest in a place, to plan for future generations, and to sacrifice individual mobility for collective stability. Over time, similar villages appeared across the Fertile Crescent, eventually evolving into towns, cities, and states, making WF16 part of a much larger transformation that reshaped humanity's relationship with land, food, and society. Modern scientific techniques such as isotope analysis, DNA studies, and microscopic residue testing have allowed researchers to reconstruct daily life at WF16 in extraordinary detail, revealing diets, migration patterns, health conditions, and social structures. Yet, despite this progress, many questions remain. How leadership was organized, how conflicts were resolved, how knowledge was transmitted, and how spiritual beliefs influenced political decisions. Walking through the remains of WF16 today, visitors stand on ground where some of the first experiments in human cooperation took place, where people learned to live not just beside one another, but with one another, negotiating shared rules, responsibilities, and identities. WF16 reminds us that civilization did not begin with kings and pyramids. It began with small communities willing to trust, cooperate, and imagine a shared future. In these modest stone foundations lies the blueprint of the modern world, a quiet revolution, one that changed everything. Paradones and the first architects of the Andes. Along the northern coast of Peru, where dry desert plains meet fertile river valleys and the Pacific Ocean sends cool mist inland every morning, there lies a quiet archaeological site that few people outside academic circles have ever heard of, yet one that may completely change how we understand the earliest stages of civilization in South America, a place known as Paradones. At first glance, Paradones appears simple, almost unimpressive, a low cluster of eroded walls, stone foundations, and sandy platforms blending into the surrounding landscape, easily overlooked by travelers focused on famous sites like Machu Picchu or Chan Chan. Yet beneath this modest surface lies evidence of organized human life, dating back thousands of years before most recognized Andean civilizations even existed. Paradones is believed to date to the late Preteramic and early formative periods, around 3000 to 1800 BCE, a time when communities along Peru's Coast were transitioning from mobile fishing and foraging groups into settled agricultural societies, slowly learning how to manage rivers, domesticate crops, and construct permanent settlements in one of the world's most challenging environments. The site consists of early stone and adobe structures arranged in deliberate patterns, forming small plazas, residential areas, and ceremonial spaces, indicating that these people were already thinking in terms of community planning, shared spaces, and long-term occupation rather than temporary camps. Excavations have revealed thick walls, carefully leveled floors, and layered construction phases, showing that buildings were repeatedly renovated and expanded over generations, reflecting stability, inheritance, and social continuity. Perhaps the most important discovery at Paradones is the evidence of early irrigation systems and water control features, including channels and reservoirs designed to capture seasonal river flow and distribute it to surrounding farmland, allowing crops such as cotton, squash, beans, and early maize to be cultivated in an otherwise arid desert landscape. This hydraulic knowledge formed the foundation of later Andean civilizations, proving that complex engineering traditions emerged thousands of years before the Inca Empire. Paradones also reveals a strong connection between coastal and inland communities. Shell ornaments from the ocean, stone tools from mountain regions, and exotic minerals from the distant valleys show that early trade networks were already operating, linking diverse ecological zones and encouraging cultural exchange. These networks were not driven by states or empires. They were built by ordinary people negotiating cooperation, trust, and mutual benefit across long distances. Ritual life played a central role at Paradones. Special platforms, fire pits, and offering deposits indicate communal ceremonies focused on fertility, water, and seasonal cycles, essential concerns in a region where survival depended on understanding climate patterns and river behavior. Some structures appear to have been used exclusively for gatherings, feasts, and spiritual activities, suggesting the presence of early religious specialists who organized rituals and mediated between humans and natural forces. The people of Paradones lived in close relationship with their environment. They relied on fishing, farming, and herding. They observed ocean currents, rainfall patterns, and mountain snowmelt. They adapted their architecture to withstand earthquakes and floods. Their survival depended on careful balance rather than domination of nature. Archaeological evidence shows that these communities experienced periods of growth and decline, likely linked to El Niño events, droughts, and shifting river courses, forcing them to constantly adapt, rebuild, and sometimes relocate. This cycle of resilience and reinvention shaped Andean civilization for millennia. Modern analysis of plant remains, animal bones, and human skeletons has revealed detailed information about diet, health, and social organization, showing relatively low levels of inequality compared to later empires, suggesting that early Andean societies were more cooperative and less hierarchical. Yet many mysteries remain. How leadership was structured, how construction knowledge was transmitted, how conflicts were resolved, and how spiritual authority was maintained without centralized power. Walking through Paradones today, visitors see only fragments of walls and platforms, but beneath their feet lies one of humanity's earliest experiments in building sustainable communities in extreme environments. This site represents the moment when people stopped merely reacting to nature and began working with it consciously, designing systems that could support generations. Paradones reminds us that civilization did not begin with conquest and kings. It began with cooperation, water management, shared labor, and patient observation of the natural world. In these quiet ruins lies the blueprint of Andean ingenuity, a foundation upon which great empires would later rise. Corral and the birth of America's first civilization, on the dry northern coast of Peru, where narrow green river valleys cut through vast desert plains and life depends entirely on seasonal water flowing down from distant Andean glaciers, there lies a cluster of ancient settlements that quietly rewrote everything historians once believed about the origins of civilization in the Americas, a region known today as Norte Chico, and at its heart, the remarkable city of Corral. For most of the 20th century, scholars believed that complex civilizations in the Americas emerged relatively late, long after those of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley. Yet excavations in Norte Chico revealed monumental architecture dating back more than 5,000 years, proving that advanced societies were rising in Peru at roughly the same time as the world's earliest civilizations. Caral, the largest and best preserved of these settlements, contains massive stepped pyramids, sunken, circular plazas, ceremonial platforms, and residential complexes built entirely without metal tools, wheels, pottery, or writing, relying solely on human coordination, stone tools, and shared knowledge. Some of these pyramids rise more than 20 meters high and required millions of stones and earth-filled bags to construct, indicating a level of organization, leadership, and social cooperation previously thought impossible for societies without centralized states. What makes Norte Chico especially unique is that its civilization developed without evidence of large-scale warfare, fortifications, or weapon production, suggesting that social cohesion was maintained primarily through religious authority, economic interdependence, and shared ritual rather than military force. Archaeologists have found no mass graves, no defensive walls, no signs of violent conquest. Instead, they have uncovered musical instruments made from bird bones, ceremonial textiles, ritual offerings, and elaborate architectural alignments, pointing toward a culture centered on performance, belief, and symbolism. The economy of Caral and neighboring villages depended on a delicate balance between coastal fishing communities and inland agricultural settlements, forming one of the world's earliest known examples of large-scale economic specialization and trade. Coastal villages supplied dried fish rich in protein. Inland farmers produced cotton, squash, beans, and early maize. Cotton was used to make fishing nets. Fish fed inland populations. Each group depended on the other. This mutual reliance created stability without centralized coercion. Irrigation systems diverted river water into carefully managed fields, allowing consistent food production in an otherwise hostile desert environment, while flood control techniques protected settlements from seasonal disasters. These hydraulic systems required collective maintenance, reinforcing cooperation and shared responsibility. Religious life played a central role in Norte Chico society. Large plazas and platforms were designed for public ceremonies, musical performances, and seasonal festivals that reinforced social bonds and legitimized leadership. Priests likely served as astronomers, calendar keepers, and mediators between people and natural forces. Some structures are aligned with solar events, suggesting early astronomical knowledge. One of the most intriguing discoveries at Caral is the presence of quipu-like knotted cords, possible early recording devices that may represent the earliest form of information storage in the Americas, hinting that complex administration existed even without written language. Over centuries, Caral and its sister villages expanded, declined, and were rebuilt multiple times, responding to environmental changes such as droughts, earthquakes, and El Niño events, demonstrating remarkable resilience and adaptability. Eventually, climatic shifts and changing trade routes weakened the system, leading to gradual abandonment rather than sudden collapse, as people migrated to new regions carrying knowledge with them. Modern research using satellite imaging, radiocarbon dating, and soil analysis continues to reveal new sites and connections, showing that Norte Chico was not a single city, but a regional network of interdependent communities. Yet many questions remain unanswered. How leaders were chosen, how conflicts were resolved, how religious authority functioned, and how knowledge was transmitted across generations without writing. Walking among Caral's pyramids today, visitors stand before structures older than most monuments in the Old World, realizing that civilization did not follow a single path or arise in one region alone. It emerged independently in multiple places, driven by human creativity, cooperation, and adaptability. Caral and the Norte Chico villages demonstrate that complex societies can flourish without kings, armies, or empires, built instead on shared purpose and collective effort. They represent one of humanity's earliest successful experiments in organized life, a quiet revolution in the desert, one that changed the course of history in the Americas forever. Sechin Bajo and the dawn of monument builders. In the wide Casma Valley of northern Peru, where dry desert plains are interrupted by narrow ribbons of green fed by mountain rivers, there lies an ancient site that quietly holds one of the greatest secrets of human history, a place that forces us to rethink when, why, and how people first began building monumental architecture, a site known as Sechin Bajo. For decades, archaeologists believed that large ceremonial centers and massive public structures only appeared after societies developed full agriculture, strong political hierarchies, and complex economic systems. Yet excavations at Sechin Bajo revealed something completely unexpected. Monumental stone plazas and ceremonial platforms built more than 5,500 years ago at a time when people were still living relatively simple lives. Radiocarbon dating places some of Sechin Bajo's earliest construction phases around 3500 BCE, making them older than corrals. Major pyramids and among the earliest known large-scale stone constructions in the Americas, evidence that organized building projects began far earlier than previously imagined. The heart of Sechin Bajo is a massive circular sunken plaza, carefully carved into the ground and lined with stone blocks, connected to surrounding platforms and corridors through symmetrical stairways, creating a space designed for public gathering, ritual performance, and collective experience. Building such a plaza required thousands of tons of stone and earth to be quarried, transported, shaped, and assembled by hand, demanding careful planning, leadership, and social coordination despite the absence of writing, metal tools, or formal engineering systems. What makes this achievement even more surprising is that the people who built Sechin Bajo were not yet fully dependent on large-scale agriculture. They combined fishing, foraging, small-scale farming, and seasonal mobility, showing that monumental construction did not arise only from food surplus, but from shared belief and social motivation. This suggests that religion, ritual, and communal identity may have driven early large-scale cooperation before political power and economic inequality emerged. Excavations have uncovered evidence of repeated construction phases, with older structures deliberately buried and replaced by newer ones, indicating a tradition of renewal and symbolic transformation rather than simple expansion. Each generation reshaped sacred space, reinforcing continuity while adapting to new needs. Stone reliefs, carvings, and symbolic elements found at the site hint at early cosmological beliefs involving duality, cycles, and natural forces, though much of this symbolism remains undeciphered. Some platforms were oriented toward mountain peaks and river courses, showing awareness of landscape alignment and environmental integration. The Casma Valley itself offered both opportunity and danger. Its rivers provided water for crops. Its floods could destroy settlements. Its earthquakes could damage structures. Yet Sechin Bajo's builders developed techniques to stabilize foundations, manage drainage, and reinforce walls, allowing many structures to survive for millennia. Archaeological analysis reveals that labor at Sechin Bajo was organized through seasonal gatherings, where dispersed communities came together to build, celebrate, and reinforce social ties, transforming construction into a cultural event rather than forced labor. Food remains. Cooking areas and communal spaces suggest large feasts accompanied building phases, blending work with ceremony. Over time, Sechin Bajo became part of a regional network of ceremonial centers, including Sechin Alto and other nearby sites, forming one of the earliest known sacred landscapes in South America. Knowledge, rituals, and architectural styles circulated across this network, creating shared cultural identity. Despite its importance, Sechin Bajo eventually declined, likely due to environmental changes, shifting trade routes, and social transformations that redirected population centers elsewhere. Rather than collapsing violently, it faded gradually, leaving behind layered monuments that preserved its long history. Modern research using ground-penetrating radar, 3D mapping, and microscopic residue analysis continues to uncover hidden phases and features, revealing that much of the site still lies buried beneath later construction. Each discovery pushes the timeline of organized society further back, Sechin Bajo challenges one of humanity's most basic assumptions, that complexity comes only after abundance. Here, people built monuments before wealth, hierarchy, and empire. They cooperated before kings. They organized before bureaucracy. They created sacred spaces before cities. Standing in the sunken plaza today, surrounded by ancient stone walls shaped by hands that lived 5,500 years ago, visitors confront a powerful realization. Human beings did not wait for perfect conditions to create meaning. They created meaning first. And from that meaning, civilization grew. Sechin Bajo is not just an early construction site. It is evidence of humanity's first great leap toward collective imagination, a moment when people began shaping the world not only for survival, but for belief, memory, and identity. Pedra Furada and the question of America's first humans. In the remote interior of northeastern Brazil, where red sandstone cliffs rise above dry forests and rocky valleys, and where seasonal rains briefly transform dusty landscapes into flowing rivers, there exists a group of rock shelters that have become the center of one of the most intense and controversial debates in modern archaeology, a place known as Pedra Furada. For decades, scientists believed that humans first entered the Americas around 13,000 years ago, crossing from Siberia into Alaska during the last ice age and slowly spreading southward, a theory known as the Clovis First model that shaped textbooks and academic thinking for much of the 20th century. Pedra Furada challenged this story. Excavations at the site revealed layers of ash, stone fragments, hearth-like structures, and possible tools buried deep beneath later sediments, suggesting human activity dating back more than 30,000 years, and in some interpretations even earlier, a timeline that would completely rewrite the history of human migration. If these dates are correct, humans reached South America tens of thousands of years before they were supposed to, implying unknown migration routes, lost coastal journeys, or multiple waves of settlement that left few traces elsewhere. At the heart of the debate are the earliest layers found beneath the rock shelters, where clusters of burned stones, charcoal fragments, and fractured quartz pieces appear repeatedly in organized patterns, resembling ancient fireplaces and tool-making areas rather than random natural deposits. Supporters of early occupation argue that these features show deliberate fire use, controlled heating, and purposeful stone modification, all hallmarks of human behavior that cannot easily be explained by natural processes. They point to circular arrangements of stones, repeated burn layers, and consistent spatial organization as evidence of campsites used over thousands of years. However, critics remain skeptical. They argue that natural fires caused by lightning, falling rocks, and spontaneous combustion can also produce charcoal layers and fractured stones, especially in dry environments where temperature fluctuations are extreme. Quartz, in particular, fractures easily under heat and pressure, creating sharp edges that can resemble tools. According to this view, Pedra Furada's early layers are geological accidents rather than human traces. The debate has continued for more than 40 years, dividing researchers into opposing camps and inspiring countless studies, re-excavations, and laboratory tests. Radiocarbon dating, thermoluminescence analysis, and sediment studies have produced a wide range of results, some supporting very early dates, others suggesting younger ages, making consensus difficult. Adding complexity to the issue is the discovery of rock paintings near the shelters, depicting animals, hunting scenes, and abstract symbols, proving that humans definitely occupied the region thousands of years ago, even if the earliest dates remain disputed. These paintings reveal a long tradition of symbolic expression, storytelling, and cultural continuity that connects prehistoric inhabitants to later indigenous groups. Environmental studies show that during different periods, the region experienced dramatic climate changes, alternating between humid forests and dry savannas, forcing human populations to adapt constantly to shifting conditions. If early humans were present here tens of thousands of years ago, they would have been among the most resilient and innovative migrants in human history. Some researchers propose that early settlers reached South America by following coastlines, using boats and marine resources, rather than crossing icy land bridges, a hypothesis supported by discoveries at other pre-Clovis sites across the continent. If true, many early coastal settlements may now lie submerged beneath rising sea levels, explaining why evidence is so scarce. Pedra Furada also raises deeper philosophical questions about how science works. It shows how evidence is interpreted through existing theories, how new discoveries challenge established beliefs, how controversy can slow acceptance of alternative ideas, and how knowledge evolves through debate rather than certainty. Modern technologies such as microscopic residue analysis, experimental archaeology, and high-precision dating continue to refine our understanding of the site, yet no definitive verdict has emerged. Some layers strongly suggest human activity. Others remain ambiguous. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Walking through the Pedra Furada shelters today, visitors see layers of sediment exposed like pages in a massive book, each representing thousands of years of environmental change, animal movement, and possible human presence. Every layer tells part of a story, but not all pages are easy to read. Pedra Furada reminds us that human history is far older and more complex than simple timelines suggest. It teaches us humility. It shows that migration, adaptation, and survival occurred through many routes and many experiments, most of which left only faint traces. Whether or not the earliest layers proved to be human-made, Pedra Furada has already changed archaeology by forcing researchers to question assumptions and explore new possibilities. It stands as a symbol of scientific uncertainty, a place where answers are still forming, where the past refuses to be neatly packaged, and where humanity's deepest origins in the Americas remain, for now, an open question written in stone and ash. Uanafuda and the first stories of the Sahara. In the vast emptiness of the Libyan Sahara, where endless seas of sand stretch beneath burning skies and rocky plateaus rise suddenly from the desert like islands in an ocean of dust, there exists a small rock shelter that looks insignificant from a distance, yet preserves within its layers one of the most important records of early human life in North Africa, a place known as Uanafuda. Today, the region surrounding Uanafuda appears almost completely lifeless. Rain is rare. Vegetation is scarce. Temperatures are extreme. Survival seems nearly impossible. Yet thousands of years ago, this land was very different. During what scientists call the African humid period, the Sahara was green, filled with lakes, rivers, grasslands, and wildlife, creating an environment capable of supporting large human populations. It was in this lost green world that Uanafuda became a center of human activity. Excavations at the rock shelter have revealed deeply layered deposits containing stone tools, animal bones, hearths, pottery fragments, and burial remains, showing continuous occupation from roughly 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, covering the transition from mobile hunter-gatherers to early pastoral societies. These layers act like a time capsule, preserving evidence of how people adapted as their environment slowly transformed from fertile grassland into desert. One of the most remarkable discoveries at Uanafuda is the presence of early domesticated cattle remains, along with ceremonial burials of livestock, suggesting that herding was not only an economic activity, but also a spiritual practice deeply embedded in social identity. Cattle were symbols of wealth, status, fertility, and cosmic balance. They connected humans to land, ancestors, and seasonal cycles. Some animals were buried with care, sometimes decorated with ochre or placed in special positions, reflecting ritual significance rather than simple disposal. Human burials have also been found inside and near the shelter, often accompanied by beads, ornaments, and tools, indicating beliefs about afterlife, memory, and continuity. The dead were not separated from daily life. They remained part of the community, part of the landscape. Stone tools discovered at Uanafuda show advanced craftsmanship, including finely shaped blades, scrapers, and projectile points, demonstrating long traditions of technological innovation and knowledge transmission across generations. These tools were adapted to changing resources, from hunting large savanna animals to managing herds and processing plant foods. Pottery, fragments represent another major milestone. Some of the earliest ceramic traditions in the Sahara appear here, with vessels decorated in complex geometric patterns, suggesting not only functional use, but also aesthetic expression and symbolic communication. The introduction of pottery reflects changing lifestyles, food, storage practices, and social organization. Environmental evidence preserved in sediments, pollen, and animal remains shows that Uanafuda's inhabitants experienced gradual drying over centuries, watching lakes shrink, vegetation disappear, and wildlife migrate away. Rather than collapsing suddenly, these communities responded through mobility, innovation, and cultural transformation, shifting from hunting to herding and eventually migrating toward more stable water sources. Uanafuda therefore documents one of humanity's greatest adaptive challenges, learning how to survive when an entire ecosystem slowly vanished. It shows resilience in the face of environmental crisis. It shows creativity under pressure. It shows how culture evolves when nature changes. Another fascinating aspect of the site is evidence of long-distance connections. Shell beads from coastal regions, exotic stones from distant mountains, and stylistic similarities with sites hundreds of kilometers away reveal that Uanafuda was part of wide social networks that exchanged goods, ideas, and traditions across North Africa. These networks helped communities survive by sharing knowledge and resources. Modern scientific techniques, including stable isotope analysis, ancient DNA studies, and microscopic residue testing, have allowed researchers to reconstruct diets, migration patterns, and kinship systems, revealing surprisingly complex social structures for societies without formal states. Yet despite these advances, many mysteries remain. How leadership was organized, how rituals were coordinated, how knowledge was transmitted, and how communities decided when to stay and when to leave. Walking into Uanafuda today, visitors enter a shallow rock shelter surrounded by silence and stone, yet beneath their feet lie thousands of years of human experience, preserved layer by layer like chapters in a forgotten book. Every hearth represents a family gathering. Every tool reflects learned skill. Every burial tells a story of love, loss, and memory. Uanafuda reminds us that human history is not only written in cities and monuments, but also in small shelters, campsites, and everyday spaces where people struggled, adapted, and dreamed. It shows that even in places that now seem empty and hostile, humanity once flourished. And in its quiet shadows, Uanafuda continues to whisper the story of a green Sahara and the people who learned to live with it. Durankulak and Europe's forgotten oldest town. On the northern coast of Bulgaria, where the Black Sea meets wide open plains and shallow lakes reflect changing skies, there lies a quiet landscape that gives no obvious sign of its ancient importance, a place where reeds sway in the wind and birds circle above calm waters. Yet beneath this peaceful surface rests one of the most remarkable prehistoric settlements ever discovered in Europe, a site known as Durankulak. For most of history, this area was seen as ordinary farmland and wetlands, used by fishermen and farmers without any awareness that they were living on top of thousands of years of human memory, until archaeologists began excavating in the 20th century and uncovered layer after layer of stone houses, streets, cemeteries, and ceremonial spaces dating back more than 7,000 years. Durankulak flourished during the late Neolithic and Chalcolithic periods, roughly between 5500 and 4300 BCE, making it one of the earliest known large permanent settlements in Europe, a place where people were already living in organized neighborhoods long before the rise of famous ancient civilizations. Unlike scattered villages of earlier periods, Durankulak shows clear signs of urban planning, with rectangular stone houses arranged in rows, shared courtyards, drainage systems, and defined activity zones, indicating that its inhabitants understood how to organize space for efficiency, cooperation, and social harmony. The houses were built using carefully shaped limestone blocks and clay plaster, creating solid structures that could withstand harsh coastal weather, while interior features such as hearths, storage areas, and workspaces reveal a high degree of domestic specialization. One of the most extraordinary aspects of Durankulak is its vast cemetery, containing more than 1,200 burials, many richly furnished with gold ornaments, copper tools, pottery, and decorative objects, making it one of the earliest sites in the world to show clear evidence of social inequality and accumulated wealth. Some graves contain hundreds of gold items, while others are simple and modest, revealing that status differences had already emerged, suggesting the presence of elites, skilled specialists, and powerful families within the community. Among these burials is what is considered one of the oldest gold treasures in human history, predating even the famous Varna gold by centuries, proving that metallurgy and luxury craftsmanship developed earlier than once believed. The people of Durankulak were skilled farmers, herders, fishermen, and traders, exploiting the rich resources of land and sea while maintaining trade connections with distant regions across the Balkans and beyond. Shells from the Mediterranean, obsidian from volcanic regions, and exotic stones from faraway mountains have been found at the site, showing that long-distance exchange networks were already active, religious and symbolic practices were deeply embedded in daily life. Many graves contain figurines, amulets, and ritual objects associated with fertility, protection, and cosmic order, reflecting complex belief systems that helped structure social behavior. Some houses show evidence of ritual deposits beneath floors, suggesting that spiritual ceremonies accompanied construction and domestic life. Durankulak also provides important clues about early technological innovation. Copper tools, polished stone axes, weaving equipment, and pottery kilns demonstrate growing specialization and craft production, indicating a transition toward more complex economies. Environmental evidence reveals that the settlement thrived during a period of relative climatic stability when fertile soils, abundant water, and rich fisheries supported population growth. However, gradual climate changes, rising sea levels, and ecological stress eventually weakened the community, forcing people to abandon the site and migrate inland. Rather than collapsing violently, Durankulak seems to have declined slowly as opportunities shifted elsewhere. Modern scientific techniques, including DNA analysis, isotope studies, and digital reconstruction, have allowed researchers to study kinship patterns, migration histories, and health conditions, revealing a surprisingly interconnected and mobile population. Yet, despite decades of research, many mysteries remain. How leadership was organized, how conflicts were resolved, how wealth was accumulated, and how social cohesion was maintained in such a large community. Walking across the site today, visitors move through open fields and quiet wetlands, unaware that beneath their feet once stood stone houses filled with voices, laughter, work, and ceremony. Durankulak reminds us that Europe's path to civilization began much earlier than once believed, long before classical Greece, long before Rome, long before medieval kingdoms. People here were already building towns, creating wealth, organizing society, and shaping history. It stands as evidence that human complexity does not emerge suddenly. It grows slowly, layer by layer, generation by generation. And in the silent earth of Durankulak, that story still waits to be heard. Tripilia and the world's first planned mega-settlements across the wide plains of modern Ukraine, Moldova, and eastern Romania, where fertile black soil stretches to the horizon and rivers wind slowly through open landscapes, there once existed a civilization that quietly created some of the largest and most carefully planned human settlements on Earth, thousands of years before the rise of famous ancient cities, a culture known today as Tripilia, or Cucuteni Tripilia. Between roughly 5400 and 2700 BCE, the Tripilia people built enormous circular towns that sometimes covered more than 300 hectares and housed tens of thousands of inhabitants, making them larger than most cities anywhere in the world at the time, and doing so without kings, armies, writing systems, or centralized states. From the air, these settlements reveal astonishing patterns, with houses arranged in perfect concentric rings around central plazas, connected by radial pathways and surrounded by open farmland, forming designs so precise that they resemble modern urban plans rather than prehistoric villages. Each town was carefully organized: residential zones, work areas, storage spaces, ceremonial centers, all positioned according to shared rules passed down through generations, indicating strong social coordination and collective decision-making. The houses themselves were large, multi-room structures built from wood frames covered in clay plaster, often 2 stories high, with decorated walls, built-in ovens, storage platforms, and painted interiors, demonstrating advanced domestic architecture and high living standards for the period. Inside many houses, archaeologists have found altars, figurines, and symbolic objects linked to fertility, ancestors, and seasonal cycles, showing that religion was woven directly into everyday life rather than confined to separate temples. One of the most mysterious practices of the Tripilia culture was the repeated ritual burning of their own settlements. Every 60 to 80 years, entire towns were deliberately set on fire, destroying hundreds or even thousands of houses at once, after which new towns were rebuilt nearby following similar circular plans. These were not accidents. The burn layers are consistent. The fires were controlled. Valuable objects were often removed beforehand. This suggests a deliberate cultural tradition, possibly linked to beliefs about renewal, purification, and cyclical time. Some scholars interpret this practice as symbolic rebirth, where communities periodically closed one chapter of their existence and began another, maintaining spiritual balance and social unity. Others believe it may have helped control pests, disease, and structural decay. Either way, it reflects a worldview radically different from modern ideas of permanent cities. The Tripilia economy combined agriculture, animal husbandry, weaving, pottery production, and long-distance trade, creating one of the most productive prehistoric systems in Europe. Their pottery is among the most beautiful of the Neolithic world, decorated with complex spirals, waves, and geometric patterns in red, black, and white, revealing sophisticated artistic traditions. Trade networks connected Tripilia towns to the Balkans, the Carpathians, and the Black Sea region, bringing in copper, obsidian, shells, and exotic stones, while exporting agricultural products and crafted goods. Despite their size and organization, Tripilia settlements show little evidence of warfare. No city walls, no mass graves, no weapon stockpiles. This suggests that social stability was maintained through cooperation, shared belief, and mutual dependence rather than violence. Yet around 2700 BCE, the Tripilia culture declined and disappeared. Population densities decreased. Large towns were abandoned. Smaller villages replaced mega-settlements. The reasons remain debated. Climate change, soil exhaustion, resource depletion, migration, pressure from steppe nomads, internal social stress. All may have played roles. Rather than collapsing suddenly, the system gradually unraveled. Knowledge dispersed. Traditions faded. Communities transformed. Modern aerial surveys, satellite imaging, and magnetic scanning have revealed dozens of previously unknown Tripilia megasites hidden beneath farmland, proving that this civilization was far larger and more complex than previously imagined. Yet many questions remain. How leadership worked without kings, how tens of thousands were fed, how conflicts were managed, how rituals coordinated such massive populations. Walking over these fields today, visitors see only crops and grass, unaware that beneath the soil lie the remains of some of humanity's earliest experiments in large-scale urban life. Tripilia shows that complex cities do not require empires. That organization can emerge from cooperation. That planning can exist without bureaucracy. And that human societies have long been capable of astonishing creativity. These circular towns were not primitive villages. They were bold social experiments. Visions of how people might live together in harmony. Experiments whose lessons may still matter today. And in their buried foundations, the story of humanity's first planned cities continues to wait for rediscovery. Carrowkeel Cairn, G and the Language of Stone. High on the rugged peaks of the Bricklive Mountains in Western Ireland, where Atlantic winds sweep across open moorland and clouds drift low over rocky ridges, there stands a group of ancient stone monuments that seem to belong more to the sky than to the earth, a cluster of prehistoric cairns known as Carrowkeel, and among them, one structure that holds a particularly deep and subtle mystery, Cairn G. Reaching Carrowkeel is not easy. There are no paved roads leading directly to the site. Visitors must walk uphill across uneven ground, through mist and wind, until the modern world slowly fades behind them, and only stone, sky, and silence remain. This isolation is part of the experience. It mirrors what people may have felt 5,000 years ago when they climbed these same slopes for sacred ceremonies and rituals. Cairn G dates to around 3500 to 3000 BCE, placing it in the same era as Newgrange and other major Neolithic monuments in Ireland, yet unlike its more famous counterparts, Carrowkeel remains quieter, less visited, and more mysterious. It is less polished, more exposed, more raw. Cairn G consists of a circular mound built from thousands of limestone stones, enclosing a central burial chamber connected by a narrow passage, forming what archaeologists call a passage tomb, a structure designed not merely to hold the dead, but to shape light, movement, and experience. Inside the chamber, massive upright stones support a corbelled roof that rises upward in overlapping layers, forming a stone dome that has remained stable for millennia without mortar or reinforcement, relying solely on balance, gravity, and careful placement. Each stone was chosen, shaped, and positioned by hand, requiring deep understanding of weight, pressure, and structural behavior, even though the builders had no formal mathematics or engineering texts. Some of the stones inside Cairn G are marked with carved symbols, including spirals, circles, lines, and chevrons, abstract designs whose meanings remain unknown, yet which appear repeatedly across Neolithic Europe, suggesting a shared symbolic language that crossed regional boundaries. These markings were not decorative in a casual sense. They were placed deliberately, often in hidden or shadowed areas, sometimes only visible under specific lighting conditions, indicating that they were meant to be revealed gradually, perhaps during ceremonies. One of the most remarkable features of Cairn G is its relationship with the sky. Like many Irish passage tombs, it appears to have been aligned with solar and lunar events, allowing sunlight to penetrate the chamber at certain times of year, transforming darkness into illumination for brief moments, linking the worlds of the living and the dead through cosmic cycles. These alignments required long-term observation of the sun, moon, and stars over generations, as well as precise measurement and construction, revealing that astronomy and architecture were deeply intertwined. Excavations at Carrowkeel have uncovered cremated human remains, stone beads, pottery fragments, and ritual objects, showing that Cairn G was used repeatedly over centuries as a sacred space rather than a one-time burial. People returned here to honor ancestors, renew spiritual bonds, and reaffirm community identity. Building and maintaining Cairn G would have required coordinated labor from multiple families and settlements, bringing together stone collectors, transport teams, builders, and ritual specialists, transforming construction into a collective spiritual project rather than mere physical work. Every stone placed was a shared act of memory. Over time, the site experienced damage from weather, looting, and early archaeological excavations that removed artifacts without proper documentation, leaving gaps in our understanding of how the cairn was originally used. Even so, much of its structure remains intact, silently preserving its ancient logic. Local folklore later described Carrowkeel as the home of the Sida, fairy beings who guarded hidden knowledge and treasures, a mythological echo of the site's earlier sacred status. These stories helped protect the cairns from complete destruction, as people feared disturbing powerful forces. Modern research using 3D scanning, astronomical modeling, and soil analysis continues to refine interpretations of Cairn G. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Why certain symbols were chosen, how ceremonies were conducted, who was buried there, and how religious authority was organized. Standing inside Cairn G today, surrounded by cold stone and filtered light, visitors often experience a sense of deep stillness, as if time itself has slowed, allowing the distant past to momentarily touch the present. Carrowkeel Cairn G, reminds us that ancient people did not separate science, religion, and art. For them, these were parts of a single world view. Stone was language, light was message, landscape was scripture. And through monuments like this, they wrote their understanding of existence into the earth itself, a message that still waits, patiently, to be fully understood.